The Meeples and Miniatures podcast is sponsored by Two Fat Lardies, Geek Nation Tours, and by you, the listener. Thank you to everyone for your continued generous support. Yeah, we really appreciate it. Thank you very much. The Meeples and Miniatures podcast, episode 231. Time of Legends, Joan of Arc. With hosts Neil Shook, Mike Hobbs and Mike Whittaker, and guest Jake Thornton from Mythic Games. Hello, gentle listener, and welcome to another episode of the Meeples and Miniatures podcast. My name's Neil Shook, and on this evening's show, I am joined once again by not one, but two Michaels. Which, of course, means that he's back. The Welsh Wizard has returned from parts foreign. Hello, sir.
Hello, Neil. It is me, your Asia correspondent.
Sounding a bit better than you were last week.
It actually reminds me, I forgot to put that bit on the end of the show last week. You know, the bit where we attempted to talk to you, which lasted for about, 30 seconds? A minute?
Yeah.
It was not good.
I'm quite glad, really, because I was very, very happy, and it was the wife's birthday, and it was about 11:30. So, it's probably for the best.
Fair enough. What happens in Turkey stays in Turkey. Yeah. Cool. Well, it's lovely to have you back, sir.
Thank you, mate.
Welcome. And of course, we are joined by, as well, you have already heard him, it is our troubadour. It is Mr. Michael Whittaker. Hello, sir.
Hello. How are you?
Oh, you know, end of a long day. End of a marathon book.
Yeah.
End of a marathon recording session. But what else did we expect? We had hoped on this show.
I was about to say, that was short.
It's all relative. Yes, it's all relative.
Yeah. So why was the Mammoth who have we just spoken to that you haven't released yet?
Indeed.
Timey-wimey, wibbly-wibbly.
Timey-wimey, wibbly-wobbly, etc. Yes, okay, so, due to the fact that we are recording on Wednesday night to release on this weekend, we have just recorded our feature interview for this show, which, because of who we talked to, went on a bit longer than. No, we can't say we went on longer than anticipated because we thought it was going to be a bit of a long one anyway. But it doesn't.
Yeah, but we can narrow it down to one of about 4 guests.
Yes, we spoke to Mr. Jake Thornton. Regular listeners will know has been on the show on a number of occasions. The last time we spoke to him was whilst he was being voice of Olympus for Mythic Battles, Mythic Battles Pantheon, and we caught up with him again due to the fact he is still with Mythic Games and they are about to launch a brand new Kickstarter, which I think a lot of people saw the teasers at Gen Con, so we were quite keen to kind of try and find out all the goss that he could tell us. That's coming up. Because of the fact that that's kind of like a 2-hour conversation, it does kind of throw a bit of a spanner in the works with the fact that we can't really... Well, we could still talk about the week we've had. However, considering this is meant to be a weekly show, and I've got 3 days to edit it.
I can give you the 2-sentence summary.
Yeah?
Painted the Game of Thrones army, got completely twatted playing the Game of Thrones army, had a really good time. Moving on.
Excellent.
And 3D printed 2 Crusader AA Mark IIIs.
I could do mine as well if you want, really quick.
Go on then.
I went to Turkey and played Odin's Ravens and got drunk. Next.
Me.
Come on, we've set you a good example. All you've got to do now is follow it.
Yeah.
Be the anti-Jake Thornton.
Yeah. Remember, you're editing this.
Indeed. I painted something.
Yay!
I have painted and finished, ready for this weekend, my Test of Honor Samurai Force.
Time's up!
This weekend. And I played lots of games. But we'll talk about that in depth next week. Gaming is getting crazy at the moment. At the moment, I'm on 3 gaming nights. It's brilliant. Anyway, so yeah,
there you go.
There we go. But so lots to talk about next week. Some interesting news to talk about next week, which I'm sure a lot of people have seen. Before we move on,
we're not going to do a 4-sentence news bulletin as well.
Yeah, we can do a 4-sentence news bulletin. Watch the War Cradle video on YouTube. Obviously, we reported a few weeks ago the fact that Spartan Games Rebel Publishing and Spartan Games thereof had ceased trading. War Cradle has purchased some of Spartan Games' intellectual properties. They have released a 20-minute video explaining exactly what they've got and what they can and cannot do with regards to, people who perhaps may have outstanding issues with Spartan Games or Kickstarter stuff or this, that, and the other. Go on YouTube, watch the video.
There will be a link in the show notes, possibly, if nothing.
There will.
Yes.
And very quickly, one rather pretty quick starter from Chris at Sally Forth. Just started a Kickstarter for a 28mm classic pulp movies miniatures range, which looks really nice. The first set out are from Casablanca. The next set out are from Tales of the Golden Monkey, and they're taking votes for the next couple, which include nice things like African Queen. And
another listener call out as well, before we close. Paul Edwards, who is my tame troll. Yes.
Hi, Paul.
Paul's just had knee surgery and posted a picture of him looking uncomfortable in a hospital bed. Paul, I hope you get better soon, mate. I'm missing being told off by you. So get better.
Indeed. Yes, get well, Paul. Hope everything works out well with the surgery. Yes, one final shout out. Hi, Gareth. Gareth, awesome. Thank you. You're a star.
Is this Mr. Beamish who did your Imperial Samurai ones?
He did. He did. He was incredibly kind. Thank you. Thank you, Gareth. They are awesome. Pictures to follow.
We'll forestall the debate on painting the horses first till later, as well as the continuing dunk gate, which appears to have got J. Arnold turning into President Trump.
Oh yeah, don't get me started. You don't turn around and say he said they were okay. He said they were nice, but not thrilling.
Thrilling, which he's praising with faint damn with faint praise.
Yes, let's be honest. We have to report the truth. He said they were nice, but not thrilling. In other words, yeah. But that's it. Jay, you're wrong. They should be dunked, and they are thrilling. Right, move on.
They're awesome.
Indeed. Yeah. Yes, and I do. I do agree with our resident cranky lawyer, Dark Chocolate.
Yes,
you can get them.
I think we've covered that in about 10 minutes.
Yes, more in depth on all of this next week, basically because we haven't got time. So we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we have a in-depth chat with Mr. Jake.
The reason why we don't have time.
Yes, the reason we don't have time, we have an in-depth chat with Mr. Jake Thornton all about the forthcoming Time of Legends Joan of Arc Kickstarter from Mythic Games, including news of that blooming great dragon.
I must get through to Sergeant Watson's position. Jenkins, cover me.
Sir.
Whoa. Sergeant Watson, bring your men in. Withdraw! It's all right, sir. We're enjoying ourselves.
What?
Yes, sir. It's these here chain of command rules, sir. We're having great fun. Chain of command? That's right, sir. It's a challenging but fun blend of command and control. It gives me the freedom I want to fight the way I want to. Never had so much fun, sir. And we've cooked you some sausages. Can't be helped, sir. Me and the lads are staying put. Chain of Command World War II platoon level rules from two fat laddies. They really put you in control. And they're even better than sausages.
Have you ever wondered what's going on in wargaming? We do too. So come with us as we go behind the hobby with the Meeples and Miniatures interview. Oh, good grief, has it really been so long since we have spoken to our next guest? At one point he was almost a co-host, and now it's coming up for 12 months since we last spoke. It is Mr. Jake Thornton. Hello, sir.
Hello, Neil. Hello, folks.
How on earth are you? It seems to have been ages.
It has been almost a year. Yes, it was Mythic Battles about 11 months ago, I think we were talking about.
Indeed it was, yes. Indeed it was. We were saying, before we introduced, it was unusually, we normally kind of run into each other at various events in the year.
We do.
And it appears this year you've been chained to your desk.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely, yeah. 27 hours a day, bread and water. It's been, working on, for the first 8 months or so of that, it was Mythic Battles. And all of the, we were quite successful, and the side of quite successful because you have a colossal amount of stuff to do to provide. Because you get to the end of it, you sit down, and you go, "Wow, that was great," and then you look at the enormous list of things that you then said you were going to do, and you go, "Oh, right."
I'm looking at the enormous pile of boxes and going, "Oh dear God, where am I going to put those?"
Well, that has been mentioned. So I think someone was saying we needed to include porta cabins and extensions of stretch goals and add-ons.
I'm still worried about the size of the box it's all going to come in.
If you've got a Conan box, it's about the same size as a Conan box for a core box. Yeah.
Yes.
And then there's another box the same size for the stretch goals, and another box the same size for the deluxe storage box, and then the major expansions aren't quite so big, but there are 4 of them, and then there's all the little things as well. So it can be quite a big pile of things.
I'm expecting the courier to have a bit of a heart attack.
Probably won't fit it in one box unless he's got a spare piano box.
That's it.
The good news is, folks, that we're all going to have somewhere nice to sleep in when our wives kick us out.
Well, that's interesting because that's been kind of a topic. The 2 main threads were in certain parts of the conversations we've been having with the backers. Some of the threads were one of them is where on earth am I going to put this? And then there've been several people showing their nice new storage solutions, and people were saying things like, "Oh, I'd got a space on one shelf to put this," and that's probably not going to be enough. And the other conversation was about how am I going to explain this to my wife when it arrives. It's like, I told her I'd got a core pledge. That was
pro tip for the listeners: don't worry, dear, it's already paid for.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't worry about that. I paid for it ages ago.
Exactly. What, this old thing? Owned it for ages. Only just turned up.
Well, the one thing that myself and my wife do, because there's one of these things where you see this conversation online a lot when it comes to Kickstarts and it comes to sort of talking about buying expensive, limited edition resin miniatures and whatever. And what we do is we just work out what money we've got after the bills and so on, and we give ourselves pocket money. And the whole point of pocket money is that it doesn't matter what it's spent on. accept whatever you want. And so you go, well, there's this amount of money. There you go. Do what you like with it. You could burn it. It doesn't matter. You've paid the bills already. And so that's actually quite fine because it means that she buys stuff that I think is not what I would get, but it doesn't matter. And I do the same. Makes life dead simple.
Yeah. We do a similar thing, but the downfall of it is when it comes down to the storage arrangements. So she's happy with me to actually buy this stuff, but it's where's this going to go? Yeah. You filled up the room already.
It's interesting because I have this sort of, I can almost sort of see the dark cloud of packages on the horizon from all the Kickstarter things I've bought that I know are coming kind of around the end of the year. And I'm looking at the sort of space I've got and thinking, there needs to be a reckoning here. There needs to be a cull.
Yeah.
and then when the end of the year arrives and there's all these boxes turning up, it's like, then it will be all right because they'll have made some space for them in advance. But yes, I think it's interesting that as you get older and as you get not only more years worth of buying under your belt, but you have potentially more money at your disposal, it becomes not the issue. It becomes, the storage and what you're going to do it and when you're going to get to play it become issues more important than just can you afford to buy one.
Yeah, but let's not go down the route of dilution theory, Jake, because we'll be here all night. What have you been up to?
Indeed, that's a conversation with a long and colourful history on this podcast. The last time we spoke, you'd got yourself involved with Mythic Games, having been going through your normal freelance thing, and it appears. It appears from our conversations offline that your association with Mythic Games has continued. Yes. It
has indeed. I've been working for them almost exclusively the past year. I've done a little bit here and there. I've been working occasionally with the guys at Demented Games doing Twisted. I don't know if you've seen that's kind of steampunk Victoriana kind of thing.
You're doing that?
I'm not doing those rules. No, I'm not doing the rules. I'm sort of helping and adding comments and throwing spanners in works and things like that.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I do remember seeing that. I think I saw it. I think it was Salute a couple of years ago. Yeah, but yeah.
But amazing figures. I mean, really amazing figures. And it's got this kind of. He's a big fan of confrontations. It's quite a detailed, sort of intricate thing, but that suits it mirrors the figures, which are also intricate and detailed and so on. So it's a sort of little skirmish game with this great, crazy atmosphere. Anyway, so I've been sort of helping out here and there with that, not doing the main thing, not doing the main rules and so on, but they're a great bunch. So I've done a little bit here and there on other things, but 95% of what I've been doing is with Mythic these days. Which is, as usual with these things, that there's some stuff I can talk about, and there's some stuff that's secret squirrel. So, but which you will see eventually. So most of what I did between last time I talked to you and now, 2/3 of that time probably was spent getting the Mythic Battles text in a shape for publication.
There wasn't an awful lot of work to do there, was it?
Well, there wasn't an awful lot. No, just the rule book, the getting started, the scenery book, campaign books for 4 boxes, various scenarios for other. But there were 78 scenarios, I think, in the end.
Seriously, 78.
I think it was 76 or 78. It's over 70 scenarios. Plus the rules, plus this getting started, plus the painting guide, the terrain guide, all the campaigns and stuff in that, and the art book, and all the cards, and the text for all the powers and the stats on 100 and something different cards and the different kind of unit stat cards. So what I did was I was taking the translated version and then making English kind of sense out of that. And finessing all of that until it was, as a native writer would write it, rather than you get a lot of games which are clearly translated by someone who's non-native, and they're sometimes very difficult to understand. And so we wanted it to be as a native writer would write it. So I basically rewrote the entire thing, which was why it took me a long time. because there was an awful lot of it.
Yeah, there's slightly more to translation than people think there is, isn't there?
Oh yeah, absolutely, yes. And when you're translating technical documents, which is what rules are, which are full of, I mean, you know that rules questions hinge on the most subtle understandings of exact phraseology and parts of sentences. That when you're taking a translation, you've got to then not only got to make sense out of it in language terms, you've got to make sense out of it in rules terms, so that the exact turn of phrase you use means exactly what you mean, which means you've got to actually understand exactly what you mean, you know, what you intend to mean, what the designer means, because this isn't one of my designs. So there's that kind of that remove as well. Would have been easier if I'd been doing it, but then it wouldn't have been translated from the French if I'd been doing it. I tend not to write documents in French to start with.
Indeed.
But yeah, so that took a great deal of my time. Then I've been working on helping set up Joan of Arc as well, obviously, which you know is coming. And then the next project after Joan of Arc, which is one of my designs, which was the reason I originally started talking to Mythic Games and should have been done. It just keeps getting bumped by other things. But that's really quite exciting. And we've got some art already for that is gorgeous and really evocative. And so when that comes out, I think everyone's going to be, really impressed by the way it looks and the way it feels. So that's sort of sometime next year.
And you're not allowed to tell us what it is, right?
No, not yet. I mean, we decided we don't want to kind of muddy the waters by talking about two different things at a time.
Yeah,
so we want to sort of say this is Joan of Arc's the new thing, that's next, but worry about that for a moment. There's loads of exciting stuff about Joan of Arc. We will obviously have other exciting things in the future, and we have to, the time it takes to work on these. We've got people. I mean, I've been working on this, not a great deal, but here and there. We played the first version of this a year and a half ago.
Right.
So, and we've had kind of, artists working on this kind of here and there ever since. So, I mean, it's one of those things where it's kind of slow burn for a while. And then when we finish Joan of Arc, we'll obviously be full on into this. Yeah. So that's been partly what I'm doing as well. But all the time, I mean, one of the other things I've been doing is I answer the comments on the Mythic Battles page all the time. And I write all the updates. So every week we have a What's Up Wednesday update. So we know to make sure that, I mean, I'm sure some people think it's spam, but that's fine. They can turn it off. What most people say is they're really pleased. They really like the communications we've got, the fact that we're constantly telling people what's going on. Here's a new cool piece of artwork. Here's a behind-the-scene photo. Or here's one's just gone up today. It's an interview with the guy who wrote the roleplay game with some pages of that. So, yes, I mean, I do a lot of that, which obviously is a kind of constant amount of my time to answer the 68,000 or however many comments we've got on the main comments thread, plus all the comments and all the updates. And I'm also trying to deal with things on BGG as well for Joan of Arc. So yeah, lots of that kind of thing, which is odd because that's not really what I think of as me doing.
Right.
The whole thing about doing all the communication stuff was, I mean, I'm sure I told you this story before, was I'd been talking to to Leo and Benoit from Mythic Games about the game they wanted me to do, and they said they were going to do this Mythic Battles Kickstarter, and so I'd been looking at Kickstarter and I had some suggestions. So I said, what you should do, I had a particular way I thought would be a way of running the communications on Kickstarter. I was telling them, I was over in Paris and I was talking to them saying, I had this idea. I think, what you should do is this. You should get somebody and they should do it like this because I think nobody's done it quite like this. And this would be kind of, people would like it because, and so on. And I explained this idea and it was all, I thought, well, someone else was going to do this. It was just an idea. I wasn't thinking I was going to do it. And then they said, well, who is going to do it? Why don't you do it? And I went,
curses.
Yeah.
I think I just painted myself into a corner, didn't I? Anyway, so that I fell into their evil trap, and so I ended up trying to do it, which isn't what I normally do, which is strange. But so it's kind of fun coming back to do more designs as I'm leading up to. Obviously, I've got the the Kickstarter for Joan of Arc. So I'm coming back to do the Joan of Arc Kickstarter in terms of comms. But after that, I'll be going back to do more design work, which is nice because we may potentially get someone else to do the comms. Because I'm doing quite a lot of different things at the moment, and I'd rather focus on a slightly narrower field, get more time in on the design. Busy. Yes, we've been busy. Lots of things.
We have sort of mentioned Joan of Arc a few times, and we saw the previews at Gen Con, wasn't it, Neil?
It was at Gen Con. Yes, we've all drooled over that one particular miniature, which I mean, obviously it was there just for a piece of eye candy, and obviously it's not going to be included in the game, is it?
What, you mean the dragon?
Yeah, him. Yeah. Well, he won't be in the core box. Won't fit in the core box.
He'll be carrying the core box, won't he?
Actually, he might. Yeah, we'll just get him to airdrop them to people. We'll do the shipping that way. We'll just get him to fly them to you.
Yes.
He's got the resin one. We've got the resin master is the one you've seen, and there will obviously we'll lose a couple of centimeters in shrinkage during the production process. Blah 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 blah. But at the moment, he's got a 54 centimeter wingspan.
I need a bigger house.
And this is a 15mm miniature.
Yeah, that's not going to fit on any shelf here.
Well, yeah, I mean, I came up with this term. I think we're calling it legendary scale now rather than 15mm, because I think 15mm it's almost like it's something else because of what we're doing with it. I think I've never been very.
Hang on, legendary scales.
It's the one between epic and heroic.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
Well, heroic means fat and rather bloaty.
Yes.
And too tall.
Yeah. Oh no.
And not the size you claim it is. Yes. So it's measured to the nose or the left earlobe or whatever random thing you want to measure it to.
Right.
I may have just figured out how I'm getting this passed down.
Yeah.
Right.
My wife is fond of dragons. I had slight problems with Dungeon Saga until a certain piece of green plastic came out of the expansion box.
Right.
At which point she said, "Oh, that's cool. When can we play it?"
Right.
Problem solved.
Well,
Thank you.
So, I mean, Joan of Arc, it was a bit of it sort of appeared from left field because I think everybody in the world was expecting a Mythic Battles Norse version.
Mythic Battles 2, yes. Well, yeah. I did say I was against showing that picture at the end of the previous one because I thought it would just confuse people. But anyway, it's out there. So, but why do the expected thing every time? It's much more fun to change things up. I mean, it's and I think Joan of Arc it follows the same principles that we want within Mythic games. We have sort of certain core principles that we want people to think of when they see our games, when they think of the company. And these are really about quality of artwork, quality of miniatures, and storytelling, narrative kind of adventure in that way. They're sort of immersive and full of. It's not, we're not going to do things like abstract games anytime soon. We may in the future, who knows? But we're really thinking about. We want games that tell a story. And this really does a good job of that. This is one of the, you've seen the quality of miniatures, the quality of artwork. I mean, these just speak for themselves. Perfect things to talk about on podcasts as well. But the story is I think, one of the most interesting aspects of Joan of Arc, because it encompasses such a wide variety of different scenario types. The two we've been demoing at the moment are deliberately chosen because they're quite different. One of them, the Battle of Brossinière, it is a battle, but it's almost like a sort of it's much more than just lining up and fighting. It's the British with wagons of goodies they've nicked off various French barons, trying to get those wagons back into their castle before the French ambush overruns them. Because the French realized the English went off on this war ride, nicking stuff and duffing up loads of French. And instead of chasing them, the French realized they knew where they were going. So they just waited outside the back door of the castle until the English turned up, and then jumped on them to get it all back, which I thought was kind of interesting. And that's a real story. It really happened. Most of the scenarios you find are based on real events. So that's a kind of battle-y one, but there's still a great deal of narrative to it. There's still very much story elements, rather than just, like I said, rather than just lining up and duffing each other up. The other one, which is about the werewolf, is also based on a real event. That is not only attested by period documentation, but the village that it happened in is still called something that translates into, I think, the Hanged Wolf, even now, which is a little bit weird if you think of it as a postal address. But this was a village where apparently the beginning of this story was one day 20 wolves walked into the church. that was considered to be a little bit unusual, and they thought, well, this must mean, they thought in their medieval logic, this must mean there's a werewolf causing problems, and apparently there were disappearances and so on, other things linking these sort of difficulties together, and they thought, well, the wolves is the final clue, and so they had someone come and investigate, and they found somebody they thought was the werewolf, and indeed convicted him and hung him for being a werewolf. And so what we did was we took this real story and we dealt with it as if they were right and he really was a werewolf. And so in the game, one person takes the part of the werewolf and the other person takes the part of the investigating knight and his retinue. And the knight has to work out which of the peasants is a werewolf from the various ones scattered about, and try to recruit the other peasants to his side to go and deal with it. And the werewolf is obviously busy playing a kind of shell game, trying to hide for as long as possible until he runs out, till he gets the nightfall and he can escape. And if he's found, he can turn into the werewolf form and fight. He's much more dangerous like that. But again, you don't necessarily want to be having a direct confrontation. That's not your best bet for winning. Your best bet for winning is just running circles around the investigating knights. So it's a very different kind of game, but the mechanics are identical. You get, again, what I'm saying is story. It's a good pair of scenarios to illustrate the variety of things you can do with the game system.
Jake, for people who don't know anything about at all about what you guys are doing with the Joan of Arc game, do you want to give us a sort of 10,000 feet up view of the game and what you're trying to achieve?
Cool. Yeah, sure. Joan of Arc is a board game that is set in the 100 Years' War when Joan of Arc was alive, and it's a 2, 3, or 4 player game depending on the scenario. The scenarios have different numbers. Sometimes scenarios can be played with different numbers. Usually competitive rather than cooperative, although there are cooperative scenarios as well. And the idea is that you basically fulfill whatever the scenario is. So as it's set in the 100 Years' War, it is mostly about knights. This is the height of the kind of chivalric ideal. So you have knights, peasants, longbowmen. This is the time of Agincourt. This is the time of Cressy. This is the time of Henry V of Shakespeare play fame. So there's all these kind of classic images you will have seen. You will have seen the idea of the knights and the longbowmen and the stakes the archers are hiding behind and all of this. Into that world where we have these, and it's played with miniatures on a board. There's a hex board that you put in different arrangements depending on the scenario. So and also, sorry, I forgot to mention, you also have, which is quite unusual for games, you have 3D modeled scenery. So we have, maybe slightly off on these numbers, but we have a church and three houses to make a little village, plus wells, shrines, bits of ruin, I think 10 or 12 trees, all of it kind of 3D. So there's 39 terrain elements in the core box, which mean that when you lay it out, it looks like a village. As you kind of, your eagle's eye view looks like a proper village because there's enough stuff in it. One of the main reasons we decided to go with legendary scale, which is smaller than normal 28mm, it's about half the height of your normal kind of 28, 32 mils, is that when you have a battlefield, when you have a tabletop with a 32mm game, the scenery, if you ignore all the armies and you just look at what the scenery is representing, you never really get proper villages, and you never get kind of whole swathes of forest. It's always just 3 trees or 1 house.
I suspect you're preaching to the choir here.
Well, absolutely, but I'm just sort of, we're saying I'm preaching to the masses, not the choir at the moment. So this is but I'm saying this is why we took this thing. So if we take a step backwards in terms of, going up another 1,000 feet, that's going down a scale. And so what it does is it means that without having to have an enormous table, you can have a battlefield that looks like it's a village surrounded by trees with a few fields here and there, and it looks like a scene of a real place rather than looking like 1 house and 3 trees. So it looks, that's one of the things I think you'll see when you look at pictures of it, that the battlefields often look like they could be a little medieval village or a little hamlet. There's actually enough stuff to make it look credible. And that's purely to do with shrinking the size. But I was explaining, so I'm getting sidetracked into the detail of the miniatures, which I don't want to do just yet. So anyway, you've got this table, which is a hex map with, hex tiles, sort of 6-inch across hex tiles that you lay out.
Decent size hex tiles then. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Each of them's like 15 centimeters, so 6-inch hexes. You lay out the hexes to make your map as per your scenario. You plonk all your bits of village, church, trees, whatever it's on, and you set up your armies or your forces. Because one of the other things is it's not just about armies. We've also got blacksmiths and sawbones and priests and all that kind of stuff as well. So you can, in the middle of a fight, you can have your priest praying. So he's quite important in the werewolf one I mentioned earlier. And if you get to a church and pray in the church, obviously that's even better. And sawbones can fix people and the usual, what you'd expect. But what you're doing in this is you're playing a game that is scenario based. I can't really tell you what you're doing exactly because it depends on what scenario you're playing. But it's a game that is set in the 100 Years' War. It's a miniatures game. It's exploring the stories of the different bits of this event, this story, in a game. And you use resources to decide what your actions are and to move your men around, and it's happens to use cubes or pieces to denote resources, but that doesn't really matter. It's not really about them. They're just functional. It's really about picking what you're going to do with your forces, like any other game. But it's the way you manage that. You manage your hand, and to get the right combination of stuff available at the right moment. And then, when you've got that idea that it's the 100 Years' War, it's the knights, it's the bowmen, all of this. As I mentioned with the werewolf scenario, we imagined it from the medieval point of view, as if the werewolf was real. So there is a werewolf. And so that also applies to other things. And we took I think there's been not so much hints as bold sayings in as many words of this, is that there's demonic stuff in there as well. Because the sort of great preaching of fiery doom and damnation and apocalypse and all these bad things that may happen to you was plainly something they believed in, and as well as angels, as well as the good guys. And so one of the things we have with the Kickstarter is we have what we call a super exclusive, which isn't something that is something that's only going to be available ever to people who buy a core game during the Kickstarter. Means if you wait and do a late pledge, you're not going to get them. If you want to get it in retail, you won't get them. And the 2 miniatures, we're doing a pair of miniatures that's a super exclusive, and these are Gog Magog, the 2 giants. The 2 giants who herald the beginnings of the apocalypse.
Ooh.
So that's a tiny little clue to what might be coming down the pike.
4 blokes on a horseback?
Blokes is a bit of an odd phrase for them, but
There may be horsemen, they may be flying.
One of them is.
Yeah, that's really interesting because it's if you look at history and you look at the myths and legends that grew up in, the sort of pre-Renaissance, parts of Europe, and well, probably across the world. But yeah, as you say, these things that we now think as fantasy, they thought of them as being real. So it's a great idea to sort of take those, what we now think as misconceptions, and take them back and go, well, actually, they thought they're real, so let's pretend that they are real, and bring them into.
Absolutely, and this is, I mean, this thing about the werewolf. I'm sure that the people at the time, one or two of them probably thought it was a bit far fetched, but I bet you plenty of the people in that French village, in that in 1333. They probably thought there genuinely was a werewolf. People genuinely could turn into wolves, and so yes, I mean, what we've done though is we've tried to make it possible. It's not all, it depends on the scenario, but we've tried to make it possible for people to just play what they think of as historical without any of the fantastical bits, if they want to. And certainly, there's another way of playing because we've got these boards, this scenery, these armies of miniatures. You can fight battles with them if you want. You can ignore the scenarios, or if you've played all the scenarios, you could just say, well, let's just have a battle. And so we've got a kind of simple battle game mode. It uses all the same rules with the extra bit that allows you to pick armies, basically, and an objective deck. But basically, this is kind of another way of playing the game. And of course, if you just want to play a historical battle with we play Agincourt, my army of French and your army of English, we can play that. And it works fine. That's perfectly straightforward. You can do that, or you can add Gog Magog and the bad guys, and also you can add, and the dragon, and then you can also have the good guys, like the angels, who also turn up. And plainly, if you can appeal to either side to help you. Or, if we get far enough through the Kickstarter, you can have whole armies of bad guys and good guys. Yeah. I'm kind of walking around
When's the Kickstarter start again?
The Kickstarter is the 10th of October. I'm not sure when you're going to broadcast this one.
All being well, this is going out this weekend.
So this is going out before the Kickstarter begins.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Well, in which case, if this is going out before the Kickstarter begins, then that means that you will not have seen the absolutely awesome trailer video we've got on the Kickstarter. But that's really cool. That gives away one or two things, as does the front page of the Kickstarter. But you won't have seen those yet. You'll have those to look forward to. It's going live on the 10th of October at 9 p.m. Central European Summertime, which is an hour ahead of UK time, which is, I think it's 5 a.m. I can't remember. It's on the banners what it is in Eastern Daylight Time. But so it's going live, which is if you follow the Mythic Battles thing, if you have anything to do with that, it's the same time we do everything else with.
It's
yes. It's that time. So it's running for 31 days, I think, until November. I think it's 30 or 31. I think it's 31.
So it's going to fit into end of October's pay packet.
Won't quite make November's bonus.
Well, there is the core pledge, the core box. The core box has 200. If you count the 39 terrain pieces in the core box.
Right.
Including things like, some of them are big, like the church, and some of them are smallish, like the shrine, this little roadside shrine kind of thing. It's 39 terrain pieces, and if you include those, there's 250 miniatures in the box.
Right.
And the core, plus, of course, the rules and cards and wooden bits and tokens and all the other stuff. Oh, hex tiles and everything. But the core pledge will be $120, and there will be an early bird.
Oh, right, okay.
I doubt the early bird will last very long.
It didn't last time, did it?
It lasted about 2 minutes last time. I think people were. It was about 2 minutes. It was just gone very quickly. So I expect the same kind of thing will happen here. But yes, even ignoring that, $120 seems to me to be a pretty good deal for all that stuff. I don't know what you think, but I mean, having seen it laid out, I think it looks really good. But of course, there will be more things. The dragon won't fit in the box. The dragon is not one of those miniatures. He is way too big. And I mean, we were talking about the dragon before, and he's got a half a meter wingspan. He's technically not in 32mm scale, but he is bigger than most 32mm scale dragons by a fair margin.
I think I've only seen one or two dragons anywhere near the same size.
The only ones I know, there's a few kind of naff, sort of not very detailed plastic toy dragons that are quite big. And some of the sort of D&D collectible ones come in.
The Enchantica range produced some massive ones.
Yeah, but the level of, they're not kind of what you'd call kind of nice detail, and they tend to be out of soft plastic and stuff. The only ones I can think of that are anything like this big, and they're not as big, that are kind of proper, nicely detailed War Games figures, as it were, or models like that, are the Heresy one and the Old Confrontation Titan Dragon. Both of which are beautiful, but I don't think they're quite as big as these ones. They're very different. But
well, there's only one way to find out, Jake, and that's for me to buy one, because I've got a Heresy Dragon painted. So
have you?
Yeah, I can do it.
I've got one of those. I've got a Titan Dragon, but it's not finished. It's just a monster project. But they both, of course. I mean, I don't know how much was the Heresy one? 200 quid.
Yeah.
Well, that was 200 quid. The Heresy one, the Titan Dragon, I think, was about the same kind of price when I got it. But this one, the dragon here, will be an expansion on its own with a couple of other bits in his. I think Michael, the angel Michael, I think is going to be with him, and one or two other bits and bobs. Some ruins because he trashes stuff. Because the dragon isn't just pretty; he's a playable piece. He's kind of an army in his own right, but he is a playable piece. He sort of lands on a hex. His base fills a hex exactly. His base is a 6-inch round base. And when he lands, he just kind of goes squash, and everything dies. So he's a kind of kind of awesome. I think is awesome is very much overused, but I think in context, I think he is. Anyway, he will be $60 or $65.
Sold. Right, that'll do.
So, which is I think a third of the price of the equivalent dragons, if there are any.
Hello, dear. I bought you birthday present, but you can't have it till the Kickstarter ships.
Yeah, it's 3 dragons.
Unfortunately, Anne's birthday is about October the 18th, so what can you do?
Yeah. But I've seen. I mean, you guys saw the real one at the Gen Con, or some of you, and you've seen photographs, so you know the ridiculous amount of detail that's in the textures and so on. We saw Seb is painting him at the moment, and he sent around a sort of work in progress of the bit he'd done, which happened to be his head, which wasn't finished, but it was really looking very, very nice. So by the time it gets to the Kickstarter and we've got photographs of him, I think he's going to be really impressive. I mean, well, he's not impressive in the first place just by being there, but all painted up, he looks really nice.
If you look at some of the models that you guys have produced for Mythic Battles, I mean, that Typhus model was just, he just looks outstanding. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, God, I mean, I have to paint another dragon. What colour shall I do it?
Well, when I went to the Mythic Day, I was talking to Seb, who's the painter, and you know, what colour are you going to paint it? What colour am I going to paint my dragon? What colour should we paint dragons? And it was, it's an interesting thing to be talking about. Actually.
What's the phrase? Oh dear,
Yeah, well,
I'm going to have to buy 6
and all that.
Yeah,
or something, is it? Yeah.
But yeah, so the dragon.
What was it? White, blue, green, red?
Well, green and red are the two kind of popular ones, but then you get black ones as well. And anyway, so you can imagine albino dragons would be an interesting one. But the basic thing about the dragon I was saying was it's huge, it's playable, it's a piece in the game, and it's hard to compare it to other things because even if you look at the things that are that size, it's a third of their price. So yes, the dragon is something which is going to be, I think, something of a must-have for most people.
And it comes with the angel Michael. I mean, which is obviously.
I think it's Michael. It comes with one of the angels. I think it's Michael, because Michael might have even though Michael is much smaller than the dragon, which isn't hard because everything is. He's very pokey because, of course, he's one of the leaders of the armies of the Lord, so he's quite good at fighting. But also, I think does it come with the? No, I think it's in the core box. There's the rules for flying, because the dragon can fly as well, and flying is a thing where you can go off the board and fly at a couple of different heights, and at low flying you can be shot at by things, and at high flying you can't be shot at, but you can be fought by angels and other things you might throw at people like that.
And of course, the standard iconography for Michael is fighting a dragon.
Yes. So it's a nice pair. It does make sense. And we've tried to. One of the interesting things about dealing with medieval belief and medieval imagery is that you can't take all of it entirely literally without being laughed out of town because it looks so bizarre to modern eyes. So what we've done is we've tried to take what they thought was going on and in some ways render it sympathetically to that, but not necessarily exactly the same as they have it. I'm trying to think of the best example I can think of. I don't think you've seen, and probably I'm not supposed to tell you about. But if you look at the way they depict dragons and the way they depict, I mean, there's lots of in the Bible and the Book of Revelation and things. There's all sorts of things about umpteen-headed dragons wearing crowns on each head and all sorts of things. So very strange. We've tried to do what we can in that. And the interpretation of the four horsemen of the apocalypse we have, I think, is brilliant because it includes some of the bonkers stuff that they had at the time about what the sort of, because each of the four horsemen has a set of things that define it as them. So famine always has, I can't remember which way around they are, but one of them always has a bow and an hourglass. And a bee following him around for some reason I don't understand. Another one always has a sword. Another one always has an axe and so on. There's a difference in the way they appear. So you could just look at one and you go, well, I know because he's got a bow and he's got a crown, that means it's pestilence. So we've taken those kind of fixed, definitive things and kept them in the way we've illustrated and then made models of the four horsemen, who naturally follow Gog, Magog, and merry dance across the chaos.
Okay, so let's try and get my head around the type of game it is. So it is a primarily scenario-driven, but doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
Board war game with extra resources.
You're just trying to find out whether it counts as a board game or not, aren't you?
It's a board game. It is a board game because it has a board and it's played.
You heard it from the horse's mouth, folks.
You can't play it. You can't not play it on a board. It has to have a board. So I mean, the board is an intrinsic part of the way it works and the way the movement rules work and so on. So the board is part of it. I mean, it's as I said, it's made up of big hex tiles. So it's not a fixed board. It's a mutable board, but it is a board. And you play with your men, with your miniatures on the board. What drives how you can you don't have a complete freedom of use of all of your miniatures, and that bit is the more gamey, the more board gamey bit of it. So you've got a combination. Basically, the way a turn works. If I walk through a turn with you, then you get some more ideas. May have some more questions.
Yes, please. Okay.
So, beginning of the turn, we turn over a turn card, which makes a lot of sense, and this tells us how many. Now, what I'm going to use the color has changed because these were the colors we could get of the resource cubes when we were doing the mock-ups. But originally they were red cubes, which are your basic action cube, and the turn card has a number of these on that both players get that number. So both players have a baseline number of normal actions that they can do in that turn. It could be 2, 3, or 4. That's kind of typical spread.
Okay.
And during a game, each scenario will set you up with a little turn deck that's got a set number of cards, which is the length of the scenario, because it's also your timer, and a particular set of combinations of different numbers of resources on each one. So one scenario might have more resources available than another, but be shorter, for example.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So that's your basic number. And then you have what they call a river, which I think is an odd translation, but there you go. It's called a river of 3 cards. You have 3 cards to pick from that are all different. And these give you more of some other resource or some special rule, some kind of one-off special thing you can do. So it might be a reroll you can use, or it may be an extra resource cube. But the resource cubes come in different kinds, which I'll explain in a bit. So you can get different resource cubes for your army, or maybe it's a myth card. So you have these extra cards that allow you to do fancy things, or another resource that allows you to do. Well, basically, it's one or other of several resources, and you get to pick one of these cards, and you get that extra resource. So you always get core basic actions, and then you get to pick how you want to finesse by taking something else from the various different resources you might need to do different things. So depending on what your plan was, you might want one thing or another. And I'll explain what they are in a minute. So you have a little player board. Everybody has a player board that you put your unit stat cards next to. So in the beginning of the game, it'll say you've got archers and you've got bowmen and you've got peasants and you've got whatever. Archers and bowmen. Yeah, okay. Archers and mounted bowmen. So they don't sound quite so foolish. But you have the stat cards for each of those units, and they sort of sit there as a reminder of what you've got. And if your heroes take wounds, you'd mark them on there with counters. And heroes can also level up during the some units, and some heroes have levels, so they can level up with experience during the battle, and they replace it with a new card for the second level, and they get better. But basically, what you've got is you've got your little player board with your cards next to it, and the player board is where you put your resources of each, and it's got a place for each of the different kinds of resource. There are 4 main kinds of resources, and I'll call them cubes because that's what we're going to put in the core game. You get the resource cubes. The first one is a basic activation, and what that does is that says when it's my turn, at the beginning of the whole round, we take our cubes from the turn card, we choose another card's worth of stuff to get, we add them to our player board, and then we go around. We have turns. So you'll do all of your stuff, and then I'll do all of my stuff, and that's our turns. When I say do your stuff, it means spend whatever you want from your player board to do things on the table. So if you play a normal activation cube, that activates, and this is one of the interesting oddities of this game system that I think that takes getting your head round, but it's clever when you've done that, is it activates an area, not a unit. Right? Normally, most games, I activate 3 things in my turn, I pick 3 units and I activate them like that. In this one, each activation cube activates everybody in an area of the board. Now, each hex is either 1, 2, or 3 areas. And so that could be 3 or 4 units get activated. When they're activated, they can move and fight and do whatever they want. They can all wander off in different directions. They don't have to stay together. But when I want to spend a second activation cube, I have to place it in a different area. So what that means is, if I activate an area and it's got bowmen in and they shoot, I can't then get him to do it again because that area already has a cube in it. But if they moved, they're now in an area that hasn't got a cube in it. So I could move them again. This gives you all sorts of interesting possibilities. The other kinds of cubes I have, as I said, there are 4 kinds of activation. All of them can be used like a normal activation cube if you want, and just bin the special ability, just say it's a normal activation cube. If you needed it really urgently, you needed a particular number of normal activation cubes. So we have normal activation cubes, we have charge cubes, which allow units with the charge rule, which is usually knights, to not only move, but to fight at the end of their move. So that's useful for knights. And then we have repeat cubes, or the ones that you can place in an area that's already got one. So your bowman could fire with a normal cube to activate that area, and then you could place one of these. Originally, there were pink cubes to reactivate that area. Then they could fire again. Normally, you can't do that, so that's their special thing. And the last kind of cube you can play in your opponent's turn between two of their cubes. So they play something, and you go, "Ha, right, now I'm going to interrupt you with my archers are going to shoot your knights as they rush into combat." So you've got these combination of different types of resources. You have to work out how you're going to spend them to maneuver the things on the battlefield to do whatever it is your objective is. So that's basically how it works. At the end of the end of your turn, if you've got some left, you can reserve a certain number of each type of cube until next turn. If you don't want to spend them all, if you want to save up for a big push, you can reserve a couple of each one. But my experience is you nearly always want to spend things because it's really, you always want to do more than you can. That's one of the nice things. You always, if you can always do what you want, then there's no tension, there's no decision to be made. Here, as in I think most of the best games, you're always short of things you can do. You've got 12 things you want to do, and you can do 4. But you can do 4 in quite a lot of different combinations. So you've got to think about what it is you want to do. And you could do all sorts of cool things. But which? And that's the skill. That's where the skill comes in. So when you get to combat, there's dice, and there's different colored dice for different types of units. So, but that's fairly straightforward. You know, this unit has a white dice in attack and 2 yellows in defense. It's pretty straightforward to see how that works. And you read the symbols and see who's dead and whatever. But it's it's managing the resources that is where the skill lies. To put the right people with the right good attack against the weak defense, and you know that's where the crux of it is. And that's the core of it. There are, as I said, I mentioned myth cubes and myth cards. There's also tactics cards if you want to play the historical version. This kind of myth is a fantasy, tactics are the historical version of the same deck. And they are basically extra little twiddles and things you can do, special rules, re-rolls, all that kind of stuff, some of which require a particular resource to be spent in order to power them up. Again, other things you could get from the set of 3 cards at the beginning, the river card, you're choosing your extra stuff from. So your extra stuff, now I've talked about the different cards, you always get your turn card full of basic activations, and then you get to choose from 3 different extra pools of stuff. Now, they could be an extra interrupt cube. Now, maybe the situation is you're not really bothered about that. There's, you can let the enemy do what they want, and that's fine. But maybe you don't have any, and you can see the enemy's going to charge you. But if your archers can get off a good volley before they hit, then maybe you can break up the charge. So that interrupt cube would be really important to take in your hand that needs some extra resources to power it, and so you can play that, and so you get a chance to take some of those. So that would allow you to do something else. So you can see how you've got cavalry and you want charge cubes, and that's really important. And so you can see how the choices start to be quite interesting, and how they relate to the scenario, the situation, the types of troops you've got left in your armies, and where they are on the board. But at the same time, all of this, there's no luck in all of this. It's the dice rolls for combat that are luck in, and which card gets turned over is luck. But so much of this is just down to your skill in using it. Does that give you an idea?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, it's resource management. It's
resource management. It's card management. It's all of the things about position and keeping reserves and focusing your units to be, to deliver the force at the enemy, all these kind of good old Clausewitzian sort of delivering the maximum force at the point of effort and all of this.
So we've got scenario play. You've got effectively almost like 2 modes, if you like. You have mythic mode and tactical mode. So tactical mode is much more kind of historical.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can fight the battles. You can fight with a demon army against a French army if you wanted to.
Yeah.
So that if you fancy doing that, that's perfectly doable. Because the stats all, it's just stats. It goes plugs into the game engine and works fine. The fact you might have the devil in your army is neither here nor there as far as the game's concerned. So you can fight mass battle scenario, whatever. It's very flexible.
Right. Okay. So you've talked about a couple of scenarios that you've been demoing as being very different.
Yeah.
I mean, how many scenarios are we looking at as being included in the game? And also, is there, for want of a better phrase, a campaign mode?
I'm not sure there's a separate. I don't think there's a separate campaign mode as a sort of external campaign system. There are series of scenarios that are run together as a campaign that you could play kind of linked one after the other.
Yeah,
in that sense, I don't know how many scenarios are in the book at the moment. I know that things like the dragon have scenarios that go with him. There are separate. There are some scenarios come with some of the expansions, particularly that belong with what that theme is. As I said, it's the difference between the campaign being here's 5 scenarios that kind of follow storyline from one end to the other, and a kind of campaign where you have like a necromunda or something, which is not what it has. It doesn't have that kind of campaign. Right. It's about the story. It's about kind of playing the series of linked scenarios that tell the story of Gog Magog and their many, many friends.
Okay, so it's more of a case. So it's potentially more of a case of, in a similar way to perhaps what we've seen, what we're going to see with Mythic Battles, in that you will have an expansion box, and that expansion box tells a story. So there are a series of linked linked scenarios in that story with all the associated models, etc. Yeah,
sure.
That sort of thing.
That sort of thing. Much more like Mythic Battles. So I don't think the dragon will have a campaign with it, but it will have 1 or 2 scenarios, and they'll be to use with the stuff that's in that box. And the castle is different. We haven't talked about the castle. One of the other expansions is that you will have seen at least a little corner of at the Gen Con show is the castle. That is in some ways an even bigger expansion than the dragon. It's not physically. Castles don't have wingspans, but it's measured in a different way. But you get a whole castle in there, which is quite big. And, well, weirdly, everything in this small scale is very big. You have the whole castle, and you also have in the same expansion, you have all of the stuff you need to knock the castle down. So you've got all the siege equipment. And then you've got the rules for sieges. Most of the rules are in the core box. But I think the only set of rules that's external to the core box is the siege rules that belong with the castle.
Right.
And it's interesting because doing sieges on the tabletop is a real pain in terms of design, because a siege is weeks and weeks of sitting outside a big building that they won't let you into with nothing much happening. And that's not very exciting. So what we've done is we've got basically a sort of a card, almost like a mini card game that happens in advance, that's about this sort of leading up to the final battle, and then you play the final battle. But what happens in this sort of sequence beforehand gives you advantages and disadvantages and positional advantages and informational advantages, so you can kind of see how all this stuff is led up to what is the kind of the final showdown with the castle involved. So you may have breached a hole in the wall and they're trying to defend this gap that you've knocked down with your artillery, and then you kind of carry on trying to knock a hole in it while they're busy trying to defend it while they put it back together, and so on. So you can see how you could get to this sort of interesting variety of different showdowns at the end. It's not just there. The castle's not just there as a pretty postcard and the backdrop. It's a piece of the battle at the end, a piece of the final battle. But that's got, as I said, that's got a mixture of different bits and bobs in it, including a third or however many we're up to way of playing. So it's a kind of siege mode. I think dragons might be able to just bypass castle walls there.
Yeah, they just jump over the top, don't they?
That is cheating, isn't it?
Yeah. It's quite interesting when you describe that, Jake, because a few years ago I was asked to help somebody write a set of siege rules.
Mm.
I came up with exactly the same idea of having a pre-game game, this little card
Yeah,
thing.
I think it's. I don't not laying claim to this being, anything other than as soon as you sit down with the puzzle, you kind of come to that. That's the way you do it.
Yeah.
That's the way that makes sense. Because no one wants to play. Oh, right, it's week 17. Well, what we're going to do? Well, we're going to sit here and right. 30 you get dysentery. Several of you can't find enough food. You play count the weevil in your biscuits.
Yeah.
It's like, not the most exciting thing to be doing. And then, eventually an army turns up to relieve them. And you go, what?
Yeah. But it's a really interesting sort of concept of doing sieges and the whole sort of logistics around it of, because the attacker and the defender have both got very, very different objectives. And
Yes.
Time is a killer, because
It's a very, and also you have to in the long term sort of bring in the idea of what is normally kind of a dirty word for most gamers, which is logistics. You have to have things like what happens if your army gets ill. That's obviously a huge impact in food, illness, weather. All of these things play big parts in water supply. Plays a huge part in a real siege. And it's finding ways of bringing at least a sort of flavor of some of that into the game without making it dull and bookkeeping. So that's the object of the siege, is to allow you to bring castles into the game when it gets exciting, when, as the SAS say, it goes noisy.
Yeah, I've just set an alarm for myself at 9 p.m. Central European time on the 10th. So
I have a feeling that the Weekender at Beasts of War Weekender will have the first time people will see the trailer or the Kickstarter video. And if you weren't convinced before, I think that might convince you. It's one of those things where I look at a lot of Kickstarter stuff and a lot of videos, and the standard is definitely coming up. There's been some really, really good videos recently on Kickstarter, and showing various different games. But I think this is really up there with the best of them. It's really very striking.
And I think that there could be a lot of crossover, because the way you're describing the game and what you're getting in the game, there's, especially the siege stuff, you could take some of those mechanics and use them in a traditional game. You could use that sort of mechanic to play up the pre-game, and then you could, if you didn't want to do the board game, you could just jump into a medieval game of your choice and play that, because you've done all of the setup.
Yeah, absolutely. It's whatever you play afterwards, however you resolve the denouement of the siege. This is the getting there process. This is the weeks or months before the final showdown. You could play the final showdown in a number of ways. It's just we want to, obviously we'll do it with these mechanics and these rules, and this, these models and this castle and all the rest of it. But you could do it with something else.
Yeah, it's great when you get that sort of crossover between a really good board game and the other games that people play.
Takes me back to Mighty Empires the first time round.
Oh God, yeah.
Oh, crikey, yeah.
That's kind of. It's not really designed to do the same thing, but it's that territory.
Yeah.
Back in the good old days, I love those pieces. The pieces were great.
Oh yeah, they were.
I've still got my magnetic board for that. I've got a meter by meter board covered in magnetic paper.
Look at Mr. Swanky.
And I magnetized all of the hexes and all of the play pieces so we could play Mighty Empires, and then put it up on the side.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Away from the cats.
Well, no. That was the downside, yeah.
Yeah, strangely enough, the Mighty Empire sets around our club get an awful lot of use as sort of campaign tracking devices.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, that was what they were designed for, and I think they did a lovely job.
Yeah.
But yes. So anyway, this is that kind of, and there will be other expansions with other things if we get sufficient interest in the game. I mean, people are saying, how much will the all-in be? And the answer is, well, we don't know, because we don't know how far we're going to get. We don't know. We can't tell you until. That's why the all-in. There will be an all-in because it's something everybody likes. Is one click. Just buys everything. It's been very popular, and we get asked for it a lot. But what we're saying is, well, sometime end of week 2, we'll have an idea. But at the beginning, we've got no clue. Well, we've got a clue, but we can't guarantee, because sometimes what you plan, I mean, the plan for the stretch goals in Mythic Battles lasted about an hour.
Yes.
Oh, that long?
Well, probably not, actually. I probably was just busy.
In that sort of, oh crap, we've run out of stretch goals kind of way.
Well, not really. It wasn't so much we'd run out, but they just got shuffled round interminably, so it was impossible. I mean, we had a list of what order they were going to be in, and then they got thrown out the window. But the things that were on it pretty much all ended up being stretch goals in kind of one order or another, but they just were not in that sequence. And this time we're going to try. I keep trying to insist on picking an order and planning it and doing it in that order. Makes my life doing the communications so much easier.
Yeah.
So, but what it does mean is, if, for example, one of the things it does mean, you have to be a bit flexible, obviously, because Kickstarter is designed to be. And I think one of the real strengths of Kickstarter is its interactivity. The fact that people say, we like this, we want more of this, or we don't like that, we don't want any more of that. And then you can respond in real time. Whereas if you spent tens of thousands of pounds printing something, you put it in retail and everybody goes, nah, don't want it. Then you just wasted all that money and time and effort. And they went, oh, you want more of the other thing? And you went, oh, okay, we weren't going to do that. But, in Kickstarter, you do it live before you've spent all the time and effort. So, I mean, in Mythic Battles, there were several times when people said, we want this or we don't want that we were able to actually adapt to what people were asking for and then give them to it. I mean, which works for everybody. It means we don't make product no one wants, and everybody gets something that's more like what they're after. Although I really want to have a plan that we stick to, I also know that at some point it may be something where we have, if it's really, really popular, things that we might have put as an add-on, we might dismantle and give out as stretch goals instead.
Right.
Or if we're short for product, we might squash some stretch goals together into a box and then go, here's another add-on. That works both ways. I mean, but there has to be a bit of flexibility, because it may be that people go, we don't want that thing as a stretch goal. So, okay. But people may want it as an add-on. So some people may want it, so we put it as an add-on. So, for example, with Mythic Battles, we weren't originally going to do a Paolo Parente guest box. But some people took offense to his style. And so we thought, well, okay, if we do it as an add-on, then people can buy it if they want it, and not if they don't. We don't have, people don't have to have it, which they do as a stretch goal. They get it. I mean, even though it's free, people still complain if they don't want that thing. So you have to kind of adapt to that. So we made the things we had left that were his style into a separate box. And I think that worked very well, because it meant that if people didn't want it, they just didn't have it. That's easy. It's great. I mean, it's the market in action. So yes, there's always going to be some fast movement behind the scenes.
Yeah, I was going to say probably the best thing to do, Jake, is put the stretch goals the first 500,000 before you start, and that should that should give you about 20 minutes.
I have
Maybe
really
10.
no idea. I mean, I would love that to be 20 minutes for 500,000. That would be fabulous. I have it's really slightly worrying doing this, because you just don't know. You don't know what's going to happen. I mean, you can sort of, as I said, I look at every Kickstarter that's in the tabletop games section, and I don't look at some of them for very long, because for obvious reasons. But I watch a lot of videos. I read a lot of pages. So, and I kind of some of them I just track on KickTrack and watch how they go. So I have on my computer, I have probably half a dozen KickTrack windows or KickTrack tabs open all the time, just watching certain things. So you can get a trend. You understand trends. You learn how these things work. But you can never be 100% guaranteed, because every now and again you get really weird things out of left field. And sometimes this is just random a lap of the gods stuff. Other times it's very obvious that they've mishandled it and just not made the most out of what they started off well, and then they've kind of been absentee landlords and just sort of let it drift and whatever. That happened. That's not good. But then this is it. This is the strange thing. Depending on, I suppose, the atmosphere or the reputation or something, sometimes people will do something on one Kickstarter and everyone will be up in arms, and in another Kickstarter someone will do the same thing and it won't have a ripple. It's very strange. But it's all to do with these humans. They're really weird.
Yeah, I mean, you were saying talking about trends and stuff. You were saying about Tuesdays.
Yeah, it seems like the Tuesday's the evening to do. I mean, UK time, Tuesday's the evening to do it, to go live with a Kickstarter. It's very common. It's disproportionately common, or it seems to me to be disproportionately common for certainly the biggest ones as well. Tend to go live on Tuesday. This week we've just had Seventh Continent went live on Tuesday. That's the biggest dog on the block at the moment. Resident Evil 2 went live the day before, and I suspect because they announced their date after Seventh Continent, at least I think they did. I was aware of it afterwards. I would be surprised if they didn't do that deliberately.
To avoid launching at the same time or on the same day.
Yeah, I didn't want to be doing that. The few people that did, I think, didn't help. It wasn't helped for it. It's interesting that you think this is going to be bad to be running opposite somebody doing very, very well, and to an extent, you would, that's obviously. Well, theoretically, that should be the case. That should be the case, unless everybody's got deep enough pockets to always buy what they want. But I see people talking on comments that saying, I have to pick this or that. So it obviously makes a difference to people. If people are having to choose where to put their pocket money, then obviously somebody loses out. Somebody would have done better if it hadn't been in that situation. But when we did, we're feeling a bit bold about this, because when we did Mythic Battles, over the last bit of Mythic Battles, when we were live, over the last bit of our campaign, Kingdom Death went live. And so we were very nervous about that. And there's a couple of other quite big ones as well. But Kingdom Death is obviously the most the highest funding game on Kickstarter. So, but that went live during our Kickstarter towards the end, and that was, we were thinking, well, what's going to happen? Are people going to take their pledge off us and put it on there or whatever? And actually, it was really interesting, because it made it a bit of a ghost town for about 12 hours when everybody went to see what was happening at Kingdom Death, and then it just carried on like it had never happened. It was really weird. It's really, really strange. And obviously Kingdom Death are busy making money hand over fist. And we're thinking, well, obviously that's not our audience. And from the comments, most of the people were picking one or the other. And nobody said that they were binning us to go and do that. And I think it's interesting, because it tells me that many people are planning in advance. They know they've saved up money for X, and they ignore Y and Z that happen in the meantime because they saved it up for X. So people who were, in that case, people will have been saving up for Kingdom Death, and they're going, well, I'm not spending this on Mythic Battles because, I want to save it up for Kingdom Death, or I've got enough money to do both, so it doesn't matter. Or I'm doing Mythic Battles and I don't care about Kingdom Death. I mean, that I think people are making that choice with if you tell them in advance. If you're saying in a month we're going to do this, then people have a chance to make that decision in advance to be saving money for you or not. And actually, I suspect that more people are doing that kind of thing than are happening across you at random when they're browsing the section in Kickstarter itself.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's definitely true.
yeah, it makes less difference running against a big one, I think, is what I'm saying.
So if it's good to start on a Tuesday, do you also plan your end day as well? Or is that just one of those things of, well, we have to run for a particular time period because that's what Kickstarter says?
I suppose in a way you can do that. I think it's more importantly, there's some people try running for really long periods, like 60 days. And I think it depends a lot on what kind of product you're doing that with. That works for some things. It doesn't work well for games. I think that the problem when you're running a Kickstarter is the middle bit. If you've done your marketing, if you've done your raising excitement and awareness before you start, then you should start okay, and then it's your job to maintain some level of interest during that campaign. And then you get the 48-hour kick at the end because of the way Kickstarter works, because they have 48-hour before the thing ends reminders that go out to people. That's why there's a peak at the end, because of the mechanical system of how they work. But the middle bit's the difficult bit. And the longer you run it, the bigger the middle bit is. So running a 60-day campaign gives you this great space in the middle that's horrible to deal with. Far more difficult to deal with than the front or the back. So there's an encouragement to do shorter campaigns, but then you miss potential. I mean, there's some Americans get paid fortnightly, I'm told. I don't know how common this is, but I was told it was relatively common in America. It's like nobody gets paid fortnightly in England. So that's just different and weird. And you'd have to do some research to find out how pay worked and which weekends this was on and so on. You could plan it for that, but I think in the end, if you tell people in advance what's happening, they can sort their money out themselves, and you don't have to worry so much about falling on, making sure you cover particular dates. If you do a month, then you've covered a paycheck at some point during that. That's the kind of easy maths. You go, well, I'll do a month. That's, 30, 31 days. That's fine. It's become a kind of standard. I think you'll see, occasionally you see shorter ones. These are 3-week ones instead. It wouldn't surprise me if that became more common, because running the middle bit is not the fun bit. Yeah. And that's where that's one of the places you have to lose it, where you can take something that's working and actually mess it up and lose the whole thing. And, that's where it certainly, sometimes I don't even think it's necessarily the fault of the people who are running it. Sometimes it just goes horrible, and it's, when it goes horrible, it's very unlikely to be at the very beginning or the very end. It's in the middle. It's in this middle bit when everybody's past the first excitement, everybody's not got the final frenzy yet. There's this middle bit of, well, what we're going to do. We know we like it. We've kind of read everything. We've watched all the videos. Okay, so what do we do now? And if something else shiny comes along and distracts them, that's when you can start losing people. Yeah. So you need a kind of way of keeping the momentum, the enthusiasm, and so on going, which is where Leo and I came in with Mythic Battles, and what my whole grand plan was in the first place was about exactly this problem. Because I saw this as the central challenge that was not really being addressed by everybody, or I think people are doing better jobs of it now. But I think at the time there was a real lack of understanding of that as the major issue that needed dealing with. Because running something that looks shiny and exciting when you start isn't terribly hard. By the time you got to the end, whatever you've done up to that point is as exciting as that tells you how exciting or interesting or compelling a purchase you are for the people who come back with 48 hours to go. So you've kind of done the work, or you haven't by then. So there's kind of nothing else you can do. You either do the work to get there or you don't. So it's the middle bit. The beginning's straightforward. The end kind of happens anyway. It's the middle bit. How do you handle that? And how do you handle it if somebody does exciting stuff elsewhere? You've got to maintain your interest and your, looking good. So that's the challenge. I have no idea why I got to this subject.
Seems to involve staying awake all night, from what I can tell.
Well, sometimes. Well, I think it's partly that, but it's partly having things to say. It's partly being able to talk about stuff and different things, because not everybody's interested in the art or in the process that you get there or in the tactics on the table. Some people want to find out themselves. Some people don't want to be told how it works. Some people want, there's always a variety. So you've got to be able to come up with a sort of combination, a mixture of different stuff. Leo proved very popular doing his lives. Everybody seemed to like him doing that, which is great. I find him entertaining. So that was another thing that we did, because when we did Mythic Battles, Kickstarter had just started doing live videos embedded into the pages.
Yes.
That was a new shiny thing. And so we were one of the first people to use that a lot. People use it occasionally, but we used it all the time. And so we were talking to the guys at Kickstarter, and they kept saying, and we did one, and we got 1,000 views live at the time. I think that was the first time anybody had done that. And so we were getting the Kickstart tech guys going, congratulations, you're busy pushing boundaries here, which was kind of interesting. And people have used it since to do some very interesting stuff. And I think I saw all sorts of, but that's still being experimented with. People are still trying to do combinations of linking Twitch and Facebook Live and YouTube and Kickstarter all at the same time. And that usually has technical problems, but it's an interesting thing to be trying to do. So there's still ways of engaging people and talking to them directly and so on during them, and that's typically during the middle of a campaign. So it's an interesting kind of thing, but it's a problem still. It's still a difficult thing. You're left with this combination. Do you want to make it as short as possible to avoid the middle problem? But the shorter you make it, the less likely you are to land in paychecks and when people have money, because you just, if it's a week long, people are more likely to miss it. They're not likely to have money at that particular moment. So it's problematic. So you've got these two tensions pulling different ways. It's almost like it's a game, and you have to make the best choice. So yeah, playing Kickstarter is an interesting thing, and
coming soon to a Kickstarter near you. Kickstarter the game by Jake Thornton.
I have thought about it actually. It's
that's just so horrendously meta. I think my head is going to explode.
I did think about Kickstarter the game, but I don't think. I'm sure somebody will do it at some point or other.
Quick question:
Is there such a thing, Neil?
No.
Wrong audience.
Not on this show. Okay, 15 mil.
Legendary scale.
Sorry. Legendary scale. Not something you come across an awful lot in a miniatures game, or certainly not the go-to scale.
No, it's not.
However, considering this, as you say, we're moving, we're stepping back a level and looking at things.
Yeah.
And the fact that actually it's a board game with miniatures, as opposed to a miniatures game.
Mm.
Yes, as opposed to a tabletop war game. Does that kind of help with the whole thing of changing scales?
I think two things really help. Well, I liked calling it legendary scale because calling it 15 mil makes you think of the 15 mil metal stuff you may have seen.
Yes.
To be honest, most of it's just not very good in terms of sculpting. And I think that's for a couple of reasons, one of which is it's nearly all done traditionally, and being smaller, there's only so much, people's eyes and hands only work so well. Also, you don't get paid a lot for doing 15 mil figures, so you have to do them quicker, so there's all of that. I think the combination of two things has made this work really well in this situation. One of them is digital sculpting, which is really come of age. And that the speed at which you can do conversions with digital sculpting makes it practical to do much nicer figures in that size. So that's one thing. The spectacle that you get on the table, I think, is the other one. Because if we did this as 28 mil or 32 mil, whatever the industry random number is these days, then it would be totally impractical to get what we want on the tabletop on a normal size table that everybody has. And we kind of had a vision for the game that we wanted, this kind of spectacle of whole villages and armies, and the scene being that eagle's eye view. And that whilst it would be lovely to do it in 32mm, you'd need an 8 by 12 table to play it.
Right. Okay. So it was never likely to be a Mythic Battles Joan of Arc then.
Well, you could, but Mythic Battles is a different game. It's a different game trying to do a different thing. So you could do you could do a Mythic Battles kind of approach to it, but it would be a different kind of game.
Right. Yeah.
So there's no reason why you couldn't do the elements of that world, of that background, in 32mm as a different game and so on. But it's about the scale at which Joan of Arc works as a battle is simply not practical at a larger figure scale. Plus, if you imagine the dragon would have a meter wingspan.
Does see a problem with that?
Yeah. So anyway, I think there's two things happening. One of them is that we wanted the spectacle of the game. When you just stand there and look at the game, there's a certain sort of impression that you want to have with any game. And that wasn't working with 32mm figures because you couldn't put enough on a sensible sized table and then in a sensibly sized price box. So by going down a scale, well, we're very keen on nice figures. It was a long history of nice figures in the people who we deal with. People in the company are very fond of nice figures and are very picky about this, don't like taking second best. And it was the fact that we have the digital sculpting that allowed us to do it. I mean, we came up with, originally it was going to be in 10mm. That was the original suggestion. And I argued against this because I said, you can't get the character in 10mm. It's just too small, but you can in 15. And so then we did some test miniatures and there was a lot of arguing back and forth. And we ended up with really nice test miniatures. And if you had a video, I could show you, but you've seen them online. And I think what we've ended up with, having seen some actual finish, we did a test mold now. So we actually have some kind of as they can be done by the factory miniatures, and they're really lovely. Now, I am not a fan of 15mm as a scale in terms of figures. I think we've had a lot of really, just compared to the quality of the sculpting in 32 and 15 has just lagged a long way behind. The only ones I can think of, I would say, were really nice figures, kind of really, above average, really, really nice figures are the White Dragon figures, which I think were just gorgeous. I have lots of them. Very, very nice. And there's a few, every now and again, you find it occasionally, like Copplestone does some really nice in metals. But he has a tiny little range of 15mm. And they're really nice. But there's basically, by and large, if you want armies of anything, the standard drops quite a lot. And so what we wanted was, our requirement was we could only do this if we could do really, really good figures at this size in quantity. And we've got an amazing sculptor called Irek who has done all of the kind of human-sized things, and he's just amazing. He's just bashes these things out at an unholy rate, and they're just great. They're full of character. They've got expressions on their faces. The thing is, at this size, of course, painting them is really straightforward, just color and wash. And it picks out all the details of the expressions. So the peasants are all kind of ugly. And anyway, you can, and they're all characterful. They're all really kind of loads of character. As I say, we did lots of tests about proportions, anatomical proportions, and so on. And they're not exactly right, but they're much more right than a lot of 15mm, which tend to be a bit bobble-headed. Just because faces are what people focus on. It's easy to understand why they do that. But I think these look because they're done digitally, they can have faces that are really crisp and sharp because you can simply, magnify and work on it to any size you like. It's a different technology. It allows you to do this. And We've got a lot of character. If you've seen the different individuals, the character Talbot, the Black Prince, Joan herself, and so on, you can see they've got characterful faces in this size, which is one of the reasons I wanted to call it legendary scale, was because I don't want to say it's 15 mil like all the other ones, because it isn't like all the other ones. If you look at the miniatures, it's definitely not the same kind of thing. Mm. It's not what you expect when you hear the term 15 mil.
Mm.
And it's trying to kind of say, look, this is not the same thing. It's something else.
Yeah. Interestingly, as part of that, funny enough, I did ask for a couple of listener questions coming into you, and somebody did turn around and said, by the way, this is from Lars. Hello, Lars. It said, can you ask where they found their bleeping amazing painter? He makes 15 mil stuff look like it's 32.
Well, that's partly that's two things. One of the French seem to breed very good painters. There are lots of very good French painters, and this Seb is another one of that tribe. I think this goes back culturally. It's a long argument, but basically, I think the French take continental Europe in general, and France in particular, I think, treat art as a broader subject in England. If you're a comic artist in England, certainly until quite recently, if not still, people focused on the comic, which meant you were doing something childish. And in France, they focused on the artist bit. So you were doing something that was creative and artistic and had value. And I think that allows people with talent to paint miniatures or draw comics and not be kind of ridiculed for that. And people feel that they are somehow wasting their talent or aren't doing anything important or useful or with value. And so I think that's kind of bred a culture in which it allows you to do painting figures beautifully because you're an artist, and be an artist, even if it's figures. Who cares what they're for? They're beautiful. I mean, did you see the guy they're all Sebs, but I think these ones, but did you see the crossbow Pavisas? I've seen those in real life. They are just, because you see things on screen all the time, and you get used to things being way bigger than they really are. The vast majority of times I see things on my screen, they are 2 or 3 times the size that they really are. I look at miniatures all the time, but I rarely see them just because I've got quite a big screen. They rarely come up at the size they really are. But when you see them like in the size they really are, they're just incredible things, absolutely amazing. And I think what I'm trying to get sorted is some transfers, because painting heraldry on anything is I don't care how big it is. Painting heraldry on anything is a bit of a challenge, and that's one of the charms of the army, is if you can kind of, a lot of it is straightforward. It's kind of metal and leather and wood, but there is heraldry, and being able to put at least some of that on the characters easily is, I think, going to make people, if people want to paint the armies, then I think that will make the armies look really nice, really fairly straightforwardly. And potentially we could get Little Big Man already does some 15 mil stuff, so I'm going to talk to them maybe and have a look at whatever other things we can find. But they do things like Pavis fronts in 15 mil, which is just, if you look at what Seb's painted, it's just bonkers. It's amazing. And because people used to paint artworks on the front of their Pavises, and each one would be different, and you think, oh, that's just mental. That's just completely insane. And how am I going to do that with my sort of 15 Pavisas? It's like, oh dear. They're the real nightmare unit to paint. But if we get transfers, then that will make life ever so much easier, and it will look gorgeous very straightforwardly. So how we find them? It's France. It's full of brilliant painters.
That's a bit of a follow-on question for me, if I could.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at yourselves at Mythic, you got Monolith, there's Devil Pig, you got Serious Pulp, who were doing 7 continents.
Yeah.
Studio Tomahawk, obviously doing the Saga stuff. When did the French get so good at writing rules?
Well, as I said, I think it's all linked to this acceptance of things like games and comics as being creative in a legitimate way. It can be it can be art, it can be creative, has value. Whereas until very recently, if not still, we have in England and America, it's kind of childish. It's just messing about. I mean, I have had many years people look at me sideways if I tell them I'm a game designer. That's messing about. That's not a proper job. And I think there's less of that in France, and I think that encourages people to be allowed to do it. And so I think that goes all the way through. So perhaps if I go to my bank manager and I say I want a loan because I'm going to do a games company, I think you probably get further in France than you would in the UK.
Mm. But it's also the innovation that they come up with, during their games.
Oh yes, there's some great. I mean, there are some great French designers, absolutely. But I think there's some great designers all over the place. I don't think nationality is a bar to creativity and innovation in that sense. I think what you find instead is that there's also the other thing that's going on is that how many Brazilian designers do you know of? I suspect there are plenty of Brazilian designers that I've never heard of because their games don't get translated into English.
Yeah.
Whereas these days, the French know that if you want to get any great distance, you have to translate it into English for the American market.
Mm.
So they're aware of that. So maybe there's more of the French as a proportion. More French designers are looking outside France for their marketplace. Whereas, I mean, we've got lots of really great Polish sculptors. If you look at the various different micro art studios and the kind of the aftermarket stuff like that, Puppets War. I think Puppets War isn't anyway, but you know what I mean. There's a bunch of Prodos actually. They do some amazing sculpts. They use a whole bunch of Polish sculptors I've never heard of anywhere else. They've got in-house sculptors as well now. So I mean, there's lots of Polish guys, but they seem to be doing. They do game design, but the real talent in Poland seems to mainly be sculpting. It's very strange. Why there should be this nationality kind of national bias towards particular creative skill. I don't know. Maybe it's to do with what kind of training they have available.
Yeah, could be. Yeah, it's just sometimes you just look at the games which are coming out of France. And they always just seem to be pushing the envelope just a little bit more than we see in other places. And I don't know whether it's a cultural thing or whether it's just they're more open to bringing in some of the board game mechanics that that have been around and what war gamers have sort of shied away from.
Yeah, well, maybe there's less of a sort of hard and fast line between board and wargaming. Because I mean, I'm sure we've all been to clubs, to war games clubs, where they wouldn't allow one of those heretics playing board games in the walls. And similarly, I've been to board game clubs where anyone suggested playing a game of Warhammer on a tabletop with some figures would be, ushered quietly to a corner and asked to leave. It's a weird. I think it's strange, but I always have an odd view on this anyway, because I tend to look at design, whether it's computer games, video game, whether it's video games, card games, board games, tabletop games, whatever. I'm happy to plunder anything if it's an interesting mechanic. Don't care where it's from. And what tends to happen is if you take things from other mediums, then you end up, it gets twisted in the translation because it doesn't work quite the same way because it's a different medium. And again, you get some really interesting and new stuff by deliberately doing that. If I take something out of a video game, it probably won't work exactly the same way just because it's not a video game.
But it's the start of a journey, isn't it?
That's right, but it may be something. Maybe makes me think of something as an interesting, different way of looking at a particular problem that is common to both, to that and board games, for example. And then you start going, oh well, that's an interesting way of looking at it. How can I do the equivalent kind of change in perspective within this environment, within this medium. So I think there's a lot of value in looking at that. And it's interesting to talk to people who, I know a few people who are teachers at game design courses at colleges, which is always video game courses. And universally, the ones who get it about design being kind of largely irrelevant to what medium you're using, largely unrelated to the medium you're using. You know, good design is good design, and it's not so much about what format you're using. But the students rarely do. The students have to have this pushed into them, because they nearly always come to the course thinking it's a video game design course, so that's all I need to know. I just need to play video games. I don't need to look at board games. I don't need to think about anything beyond that. And actually, there's very little in video games that's new. Nearly all of it is borrowed from previous board games. The stuff that you see in video games that's new is to do with the format being different. You know, like destructible terrain is something that is impractical for most board games, but is practical to do in video games. But that's a format thing, not a design thing, as it were.
Yeah.
But an interesting question. I mean, why are there so many good French ones? Do we just know of more good French ones? I don't know. It's hard to say.
I mean, it is interesting. I mean, even, look back a few years. I mean, I suppose the classic was, you look at what was generally going on in the hobby, and then all of a sudden Rackham came along.
Yeah.
And everybody kind of went, whoa, where on earth did this come from? At the time, from a miniatures point of view, they were streets ahead of things anything that most people had seen.
But again, I mean, that came down to money. That came down to an acceptance that if you paid the sculptor 3 times as much, they could do a better job.
Mm.
That was kind of pretty much the bottom line there, was that Rackham used to pay enormous amounts more. And I think the same happened with Infinity. I suspect that the reason why that they got Infinity were doing such nice figures was because they were willing to pay top dollar to get the figures done well. They were finding the people who are the best, and they were paying them what they needed and giving them the time, because for a sculptor, it's just how much money, how much time you're willing to hire him for. And, if you say, I want a figure every day, then you'll get a different quality to say, I want a figure every week. And it's simply that. It's simply economics, I think, which again comes back to my comment about the 15 mil. I think that it's not that people who sculpt 15 mil can't sculpt. I think it's 15 mil are intrinsically more difficult because they're smaller. But if you're doing traditional sculpting and you're being given half the time or a third of the time to sculpt a 15 mil figure as you are a 32 mil figure, what do you expect? People can't, sculptors don't. If you pay someone as a sculptor for 2 hours of his time, expect 2 hours of his work.
Mm.
Not 3 weeks. So,
Dan's got a point.
It's that simple. And then again, because it was anyway. Yeah. So I think that was what happened with Rackham. It was because that Jean Bay, who was in charge, was kind of very much coming from an artist's point of view. So he was willing to, he saw the value in the art and the sculpting, and so he was willing to pay for quality. So he picked the best people he could, and actually, Mythic Games follows in very much in that kind of mindset, where we go, we want the best art we can get, we want the best sculpting we can get. So we go to people who are world class in their field, and we pay them what we need to get the quality you see. And that again, as I said, it comes back to a simple choice about what you're willing to do to get, or what you want, what your mind, what you want to see at the end of the day, and what you're willing to do to get there. And if you're all about just cutting corners to get the cheapest thing on the table, then it'll show. It's, whatever your core values and your core business choices are, reflected on the table. So,
certainly,
we're about making these most, we're talking to I was talking to Leo the other day about a miniature we need for the game I was mentioning that I'm doing, and I was saying that he needed to warn the sculptor that as this was important, I was going to really be annoying and ask and nag him a lot. So make sure you give him some extra time, give him another week because I'm going to mess with him, you know. But this is kind of, yeah, fine, sure, that's the way we do it because we want this thing to be a certain way. We have an idea what this has to be, and it has to be right. So if it means doing it twice, it means one of the figures in during the Mythic Battles campaign wasn't good enough, so we redid it completely from scratch because it wasn't up to snuff, and that was, again, it was, you know, I take the blame for that one because I basically said, I just went, you know, that isn't good enough. That can't be this model. It's too important. You can't do that. It's not up to standard. And people agreed and we just redid it again. And of course that's expensive, but it means that you get the result you need to have at the end. You know, and you can't get around it. I mean, it's just impressed by Benoit's ability to engineer all this so it can still happen at this quality, and then people can get 250 miniatures in a box.
Yes.
I mean, this is bonkers value. And I said, I mean, at the time I was saying with Mythic Battles, I kept saying to them, can we really give them this? Can we really give them, you know, Atlas as a stretch goal? Can we really do that? It's just insane. It's like, no, you can do that. And it's like, okay. You can't do that. You can't do that a lot, but you can do that once. And anyway, so yes, there's a lot of stuff about, you know, where you're willing to cut corners, where you're willing to, you know, where you're not willing to compromise. And it's not about, you don't have to do it. You can have a very different approach. It's just where your sort of core plan is. We're about quality. I think we've all been around the gaming world long enough to just have seen a load of, you know, we've seen lots of average, and we just want gorgeous now. We just want amazing. We want to be looking at this stuff thinking, wow, this is just really just amazing stuff. And when you see the dragon, you just, you know, everybody was just people walking past the stand and they just kind of double taking and coming back and going, what's that? You know, and you know, you saw it too. You know, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I mean, that's the kind of thing that we want for us. We want to look at stuff and go, wow, that's just incredible.
Oh yeah. Yeah. If you wanted a centerpiece to grab people's attention, I mean, yeah, and kind of go, yeah, this is the sort of thing we're going to do with this game. Yeah, that was it, wasn't it? It was like whoa, hang on a minute.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's, and I think, and you then take that and you look at the quality of the rest of the stuff that goes with him, and he has to be, and you know, everything else has to be that kind of quality. So it looks of a piece. And
yes.
That's kind of what we're aiming for. We don't want it just to be one nice figure and then the rest of it you look at it, it's a bit rubbish really. But you know, you look, your first thing, the thing that stops you might be the dragon, but then you go up and you go, oh, that's great artwork, and oh, look at that, and then there's a whole army of them. They look quite cool on the table. There's a whole army and a village and a church and trees and everything, and you go, oh, look, individually, you pick one up and you go, wow, that's great. I can see the guy, you know, he's got sideburns and a big moustache and, you know, a big grim face, and wow, that, you know, and so you can kind of go all that way in. You can go right from the looking at the thing from the outside at a distance, all the way down to looking at an individual model, and all the way through, you think that's really cool. You don't sort of get to a point and then you go, oh, they're just playing pieces. They're just cheap playing pieces. That's okay. I'm fine. You know, I think that, and that's. We just decided that had to be the way, and so we did test pieces until we got it so it was.
Okay, taking a step back towards the game from where we've been in this conversation, which, you know, in our usual typical fashion has meandered around the subject a little bit on the odd occasion. But right, going right back to nuts and bolts game mechanics to answer a listener question from Joshua. Hi, Joshua on Facebook, and he said, very basic thing. Okay, game scenarios.
Yeah.
And longevity of the game generally. So, but what it boils down to is, okay, we talked about the game being scenario driven. How long does all this stuff actually take to play? And, and we talked about all these big terrain tiles and lots of stuff to be able to put out. How long does the game actually take to play? Is it something that you can play in a regular evening, or is it something you are we talking Twilight Imperium here?
Oh God, no, not Twiglet Emporium. No, it was. Well, that's trademark. That's my game about intergalactic snack empires. The game it depends on the scenario. Because obviously big scenarios take longer than small scenarios. If you want to play the battle mode, picking a huge army will take longer to play than a small scenario. So basically, to give you an example of the two demo scenarios we've been talking about, the werewolf and the bossonier, I was playing with Irek, the sculptor who made all the miniatures, and we played. He was really interested in there was kind of a puzzle in how you win in certain ways in bossonier, and we set it up, which took 10 minutes or something like that, and then we played it and we played it and we played it several times in a row, and we must have taken, I suppose, about 45 minutes to play a scenario, something like that. Okay. It was pretty quick. I managed to lose in the first turn once. That was really fast. But mostly, I would say 45 minutes or an hour would be a normal kind of length for most scenarios.
Oh, so relatively speaking, quite quickly.
Oh yeah, you could easily. I would have thought in a normal evening you could play the same thing. You could play 2 or possibly even 3 scenarios, or one really quite huge battle. I think if you had a really, really big battle, it could be a whole kind of an evening game. But most scenarios, I would expect if you wanted to, you could get 2 scenarios in an evening without too much. Well, once you've got a basic idea of the rules, your first evening will be learning the rules, playing through one scenario. Then after that, you could probably play. After you've played 1 or 2 scenarios, you'd probably be able to play two in an evening. It's not a long game. It's not a very, it's not a hugely complex game. 1 or 2 of the scenarios will be bigger, maybe an hour and a half, but I wouldn't expect, unless you have horrible analysis paralysis, I wouldn't expect games to take much longer, or fighting massive battles. 90 minutes would be, I would have thought, about the top. So not a very long game, because it tends to be, because you can actually do quite a lot in one turn if you organize it well and you plan it properly. You can get quite a lot done. And once you start, it's interesting because it works quite a lot like real battles. Once you've broken a bit of the army, you can sort of run them down and they get all messed up. With the mechanic, we can just talk about mechanics for a moment, because it activates areas, not units. The combat result that scatters people is hugely effective, because then you have to spend a resource on each individual area with a single unit in to get them all back together to do something. So if I've got a block of troops in one place romping around causing havoc and kind of scattering and killing things and making a mess of your forces, I can really cripple your ability to respond without necessarily killing all of your men, which is much more like what really happens. Anyway, so yes, 90 minutes tops. As I said, Irek and I, when I taught him, and we both probably had 2 or 3 games. Well, no, the first game we played maybe was an hour. That was his first game ever, and about my third. And then we played for several hours. We played the same game, same scenario repeatedly, and we were easily doing it in 45 minutes or so. So, and that's playing the whole scenario. I mean, it's leaving it set up, so we didn't have any setup time in there. So maybe there's 10 minutes setup and so on. But we just played it, got to the end, reset, played it, did that a few times because we were trying to work out how something worked. But yeah, it's quite quick, quite brutal when it needs to be.
Mm-hmm.
And that's without dragons. With dragons are even more brutal. But then you have the opposition to deal with them.
Yes, indeed.
The Angel Michael, the Dragon Slayer.
I get the feeling that we could be talking for another hour around various aspects of the game, but at the same time, I think you've given us enough meat and teased us enough that we've got a good idea. As much as you can without you showing us pictures and videos. We got a good idea about what's coming and what's liable, what we're likely to see in. When you're listening, if you listen to this publication, about a week to 10 days time. So let's remind ourselves. So it's going to be, it's the 10th of October.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's 9 p.m. CET.
CEST, their summertime. I think it's still in European summertime.
Right. Okay. So UK time. That's 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So that's 8 p.m. British summertime.
3 p.m. US Eastern.
Right.
And midday US Pacific.
Right. So that is the time you need to be sat in front of your media device of choice, on the Kickstarter page, waiting for everything to start.
Waiting for the off, yes.
Waiting for the off and desperately trying to get an early bird. And wishing everybody else luck. Good luck with that.
Best of luck with that, yes.
Yes. They might not. Yes. I think on Mythic Battles I finally got an early bird simply because at some point there was this tendency at some point that on the odd occasion people bailed out, didn't they?
They did. I think there was there's always some people, among 13,500 people, there's always people who have car blows up, wife leaves them, baby gets sick, there's always real world intrudes into the more entertaining aspects. So
This is it. I think I was particularly fortunate in the fact I managed to profit from somebody else dropping an early bird, but it was much later in the campaign. As you say, they kind of went quicker than hotcakes.
I think it was 2 or 3 minutes. I think they lasted on Mythic Battles. I think that was the.
Oh right, yeah. So, and as I say, with the way you tease this, potentially we could be, in a similar sort of territory. Do you think?
Possibly. I think it wouldn't surprise me. It's very, as I said before, it's really hard to know. It's slightly nerve-wracking because you never know. You think you've done a good job. You think you've presented it the way people want to hear. You think, you have faith in that you've done something really cool and that people should like it, but you just never know. So, maybe there'll be early birds hanging around 3 weeks later. I really think that's unlikely, but.
Okay, so it starts on the 10th. It runs for 30 or 31 days?
31, I think it is, yeah. But it's 30 or 31, yeah.
Right. Cool. So, core pledge is $120.
$120. The early bird is obviously a little bit less than that.
Yeah.
The only other price that has been mentioned is the dragon, who is I think $60 or $65.
Right. And some people are going to bound to ask this, especially all the modelers out there.
Yep.
Is there going to be a pledge level where you can because if the dragon's an add-on, for example, is there going to be a pledge level where you can just purchase add-ons?
Yes, there is.
Right.
So if you just want 3 dragons to decorate the house, then you can just pledge $5 or whatever it is for that pledge level and then buy whatever add-ons you want. Some people, I mean, Dragon is the obvious one. Some people have said they just want a castle. Another obvious one. And there are one or two other things that may be things people want just, for the modeling and painting. I can see one or two of the other expansions, but the other miniatures and expansions being kind of things that painters would want. It sounds
like even lending things to even things like scenery sets and stuff.
Well, if you work in that scale, yeah, then if you game in that scale, then absolutely the scenery in this is a great deal. Probably, well, I don't know. It's pretty good stuff for not a great deal of money.
Cool.
We're really, really pleased with it, and I think the fact that we've got not only village with small bits of detail, ruins, shrines, wells, walls, trees, church, big and little houses, and then you've got all of the siege machinery and all of the castle. Seems to me you can make a pretty nice medieval table.
And let's face it, it's rural France. Half the World War II war games will want it.
Actually, yeah, potentially we could. Yeah, absolutely. World War
Present
II.
company included.
I hadn't thought about that, but actually, yeah, 15 mil World War II stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I won't need the dragon for that.
No, but, I'm sure you
Although
could.
it might be an interesting answer to one of the questions that was being discussed a while ago of how do you take out the German mouse tank?
Just walk away from it slowly and it'll eventually break down.
Fair point.
About 5 minutes, it'll break down.
Yes.
Yep.
Right. Okay. So different pledge levels.
There'll be there's a pledge level for the core game. There's a pledge level for people who just want add-ons, and there's an early bird version of the
right.
And at some point during the campaign we will probably add an all-in pledge level for people who want that, because that's what people always ask for. In fact, one of the first questions we had when we went, we're doing a new game, and someone went, what's the all-in? I was like,
you don't know yet.
Okay, we have no idea. Yes, there will be one. So, yeah.
Will it include a box to keep it in?
Well, yes. We might need to add caravans to keep all this stuff in.
Yes. As I say, if the previous one is anything to go by, yes, then we will need. And hang on, Mr. Hobbs. Didn't you recently buy a shed?
Yeah, I did, Neil.
Yeah, but that's for keeping Mythic Battles in.
I'm not keeping Mythic Battles in a shed. It's a thing that should be prized and loved. It doesn't go in a leaky old shed.
I thought you were buying a new shed.
I have. But, there's always that chance. I'd rather keep it in the spare room.
One thing you can think about, though, in terms of comparing it to Mythic Battles. In Mythic Battles, there were, I can't remember, 30-ish figures in the box. And in this, there are 250 miniatures in the box. So, granted, they're not as big, but in that 250, we're counting the church and the houses and the scenery. So some of them are quite large.
Yes.
And 250 is an awful lot of figures.
Yes.
There are more. There will be more. So
there will be more. Yes. Hint, hint. There will be more. Yes. I only have one more question for you.
Right.
Which you may not be able to answer until go live.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, up until now, for the last year, we have known you as Voice of Olympus.
Oh yes.
So whose voice are you going to be when it comes down to?
I know the answer to this one.
You do know the answer to this one.
Yes, I am the voice in her head.
Perfect.
Oh, nice.
So you're becoming a figment of our imagination.
Yes, absolutely. A figment of her imagination, maybe. Who knows? Who knows?
Voice in my head, it told me to burn things.
Voice her head that told her to liberate France and kick out the English.
Yeah.
Yes. But in our case, you're simply going to be the voice in our head telling me, "Look at all the pretties. You really want to buy this, don't you?"
Which is my job normally.
Indeed. Well, Jake, as I say, I'm sure we could carry on chatting about this, for a while longer, but I think we have to turn around and say time has caught up and indeed overtaken us. So I think we're going to have to leave our conversation there and pick it up at a later date. But can I just say thank you so much for coming on the show and telling us all about Joan of Arc and peripheral subjects surrounding thereof. It has been great to catch up.
Well, thank you for inviting me again. It's always good to be on.
No, it's been great, mate. Thank you so much. I suppose all we can say is that get as much sleep as possible for the next 10 days.
Oh, yes.
Because I get the feeling you're going to need it.
Bank some sleep, yes. Buy some cans of beans because I'm not going to be allowed to go out for the next month.
Portaloo next to the...
home deliveries are a godsend.
Excellent stuff. Well, I hope it goes well. Look forward to conversing with you during the project in some way, shape or form.
Yes.
And we shall look forward to seeing all the stuff that you have been unable to tell us about.
Absolutely. All the shiny toys.
Take care, mate. We'll speak to you soon.
Thank you. See you all soon.
We hope that you're enjoying this episode of the Meeples and Miniatures podcast. If you are, would you like to support us? There's a couple of ways of doing so. You can become a patron of the show by supporting us on our Patreon page. There you can give regularly every time we produce a show. Alternatively, you may want to give a one-off donation, and you can do that by using PayPal. For more details on both these options, please click on the Donate tab on our website www.meeplesandminiatures.co.uk. So, I suppose the one question that has to be asked is your wallet prepared for what's going to happen to it in a couple of weeks?
To be honest, that minimal pledge, that cool pledge really isn't that much.
It's not, is it?
Only 90 quid at the present exchange rate. Yeah.
I do have to say that it sounds like a damn sexy game, doesn't it? I mean, it's almost tantric in its sexiness.
It does. No, I mean,
where were you again last week?
No, it's got it all. I mean, the way they're bringing in mythology. When he was describing, I was just thinking of battle lore. I was thinking of XLS.
Yeah,
all those sort of medieval style games.
I was going to say, what is it with the French and the 100 Years' War and bringing mythology into the 100 Years' War? Because, as I say, Battlelord does it, and that was designed by Days of Wonder. Okay, yeah. And XLS was French Canadian. So they've obviously got a thing about this, and it would be. I must admit, when he was describing it, I was thinking it will be really interesting to see some of the artwork and some of the imagery, because obviously, going back to XLS sort of thing, the imagery and stuff they used in that game was very different to our usual sensibilities because they were harping back a lot more to the artwork of the day and the thoughts of the day. It will be interesting to see what this interpretation of the medieval mythic medieval.
Finally.
Yes.
Yeah, that. At risk of being controversial, you know why the French like the 100 Years' War?
Because they won.
Because they won it, and it's probably the last one they won.
Yeah. I see more of a draw, really, because it's
I respectfully point out to the honourable gentleman that if one looks at a map of Europe at the moment, we don't own France.
Well, we had bits of it. We still had the bit on south. It was smaller than, Rouen sort of shrunk a bit, but it was still hanging on there for a few more years.
Point out that we controlled more of France in 1944 than we did for the previous 3 centuries.
Yeah.
So this is calling it a draw in the same way that the Black Knight would call it a draw.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. Apparently so.
Indeed.
Seems perfectly reasonable to me.
Fine. But it does sound a bit good.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Given the previews we've seen, whether it's on Gen Con or there's been some stuff on Beasts of War and various other bits and pieces, I have been kind of thinking this has been in the back of my mind for a while. Yeah. I need to stop buying stuff because this is coming in October, and I will need to pay for it in November. At least I've got at least one more pay packet between now and then.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I'm thinking of is it's going to be a couple of £100 for the bits we want to get. I've also got to factor in the 30 grand to get the extension build.
and that's just for Mythic Battles.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
And permission. It's going to have to be a 2-story, yeah? Oh, God, I don't know.
Yeah, loft extension. Oh, dear me. This is not going to be good.
Oh, no, I'm not doing a loft extension because the missus doesn't go up in the loft. And if I put nice stairs in there, she'll go up there. I don't want to go up in the loft. Yeah.
What's in the loft? Oh, nothing, dear. Nothing at all.
Nothing, no. We go at the back, Neil. We go at the back.
What's in the loft and why is it trying to fall through the ceiling, Neil?
Yes.
Did I tell you about that? I did tell you about that, didn't I? Yes. I had to empty the loft quite swiftly at one point.
Didn't you pile it all underneath your son's bunk bed and basically raise it up so he was sleeping with his nose touching the ceiling?
It was getting close at one point. I must admit, I think it was the point where I walked in to say goodnight to him one night and looked at the ceiling and went, I'm sure that ceiling should be higher. Oh, hang on a minute. And then thought, oh, hang on a second. What's above him? I think I need to.
Will it kill him?
At that age, quite probably. Yes.
Will it get damaged when it crushes him?
Dear me. Anyway, yes. So, right now, folks. Point of order. Apologies for this being a bit long, but after we finished recording with Jake, we did say, because of all the stuff that he couldn't tell us about, because the Kickstarter hasn't launched yet, we are going to record a brief, or well, for as much for us as brief as we possibly can be, considering it's Jake we're talking to. Catch up in that's going to be around about the 25th of October. So we're going to be coming back to Jake and catching up with him with how it's going. As part of that, especially once you've seen Joan of Arc, and if you have any questions or anything that you want us to ask Jake, please feel free. So we are going back to Jake from when you're hearing this, about 3.5 weeks, and we're going to talk to them a little bit more about Joan of Arc. Maybe because we're just a little bit excited about it. And it's nothing to do with a large dragon and a large castle, honest. Gov.
Really?
So, until next week, I'd just like to say thank you to Mr. Whittaker.
You're welcome.
Yes, I haven't even had a chance to talk much about cake. Or
I had 2 Mr. Kipling's Angel Slices.
That's not cake.
Let's not get into that. We haven't got time.
No, indeed not. Indeed not. Yes, and thank you to Mr. Hobbs for joining us all the way, yes, having flown back from Turkey, especially to record with us this evening. Thank you, sir.
His arms are tired.
Sorry, I flew back, especially. I flew back because they kicked me out of the hotel.
Oh, well.
But, this is just a happy coincidence.
Yes, I leave listeners with one final question. Does anybody know where I can get a chocolate zucchini?
Yeah, I'll tell you afterwards.
Bye-bye. Roll good dice.
Thank you one and all. Take care. I hope you enjoyed the show. We'll catch you next week.
Farewell, Meeps. Till we meep again.
We'll meep again. Don't know where. Don't know where.
Oh God, this doesn't sync up very well with Skype Blank, does it?
No, it doesn't. Except for the fact that we do know where and we do know when. It's same bat time, same bat channel.
Till then, see you next week.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Meeples and Miniatures podcast. If you've enjoyed the show, why not share it with others by leaving us a review on iTunes? And if you have any comments or questions, you can always email the show. The address is info@meeplesandminiatures.co.uk. And you can also visit our webpage, where you'll find a complete episode archive, all the View from the Veranda podcasts, rules reviews, and our blog of hobby items and news, which is updated several times a week. This is also where you'll find the links to our presence on social media, and here you can follow us on Twitter or join our Facebook group. And finally, here you can also find details should you wish to support us by making a donation to the podcast. All this on the Meeples and Miniatures website, www.meeplesandminiatures.co.uk. The Meeples and Miniatures podcast is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 3.0 Unported license. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.